Welcome back to the Pastist podcast. If this is your first time joining us, we are so glad that you're here. We're trying a new format this week. Here's how this is going to go. I'm Natalie, and I have all the information for today's episode. I've done all the research on our topic, and I'm going to present it to my lovely co-stars.
I'm Bridget.
And I'm Macy, and we're going to ask questions along the way, as this is the first time Natalie is presenting this to us.
Okay, so now that that's clear, we're going to be switching continents for today's episode and moving into European history, which is not a topic that any of us specialize in. So bear with us. Today's episode is on the Jacobite Uprising of 1745. I'm unsure if I ever learned about this topic in AP European history. We probably did, but I wasn't paying attention. I actually wasn't a very great history student in high school. I thought it was really boring. The first time I crossed paths with this piece of history was when I was 10 in a vocal lesson of all places. I took vocal lessons for the first several years of my life, and we focused on a lot of traditional folk music, one of my favorites being Skyboat Song, which is a traditional Scottish folk song about the Jacobite Uprising of 1745. There's tons of versions that you can listen to online. I'd encourage you guys to check it out. So I stumbled back upon this song and the history of the Jacobite Uprising when I started watching Outlander, which is a TV show, a few weeks ago. The uprising is in the context of which the first few seasons of Outlander take place. Anyways, the location for our story today is going to switch between Scotland and Great Britain. We've got to do a little bit of a breakdown on about a century of European history, so I'm going to move fast, so listen up. The year is 1688 in England, and the Glorious Revolution is happening.
Can I jump in and give a little overview of the Glorious Revolution?
I thought you'd never ask.
Okay, so during the English Civil War in the 1640s and 50s, King Charles I is executed after losing the war. This leads to a short period without a monarch, but soon after James II, who's Catholic, becomes king and attempts to make Catholicism cool again. But that really backfires since most of England at this point is Protestant. Then the Glorious Revolution begins in 1688, and William and Mary of Orange ascend to the throne. Not for long, though, because Mary's sister, Queen Anne, is soon in charge.
So I was actually wondering how British succession to the throne was intertwined in the rebellion.
Yeah, so you're totally right that this is very significant to the cause, and it gets even more complicated when Queen Anne dies without an heir to the throne, and it ends the Stuart line, which is incredibly important for the entire purpose of the Jacobites' cause.
Yeah, that's what I had been thinking. So who were the Jacobites and what did they want?
Yeah, this is a great question, so let's break this down just a little bit further. The Jacobites were a political faction whose main goal was to restore the Stuart line to the throne. They believed in the divine right of kings, which just means the belief that a hereditary ruler is destined to the throne. In this case, it's King James II. Before the 1745 uprising, there were a few other Jacobite uprisings, but for the sake of time, we're just going to focus on 1745. Just note that this ideology didn't pop up in 1745 magically. It's been around since the Glorious Revolution. So at the center of the uprising is a man that the Jacobites believe is the true heir to the throne, Charles Edward Stuart, who is commonly known as the Bonnie Prince. Bonnie is essentially the Scottish word for good. This brings us to 1745, where Prince Charles launches the rebellion in an attempt to retake the throne from King James VII. He originally tried to convince the French to fund his attempt, but after that fizzled out, he decided to turn to Scotland. Before we get into the whole war part, let me explain a few things about the Scottish Highlands at this point in time. Across the Highlands, clans were the main form of order. A clan is essentially a kin-based community, meaning that the head of the clan takes care of those under his rule. Think very feudal. The clan chief is the protector of those under him. Prince Charles begins his journey across the Highlands, gathering support for the Jacobite cause, talking to different clans. Clans are split on the cause, however, most of them decide to become Jacobites and fight with Prince Charles. Bridget, I did a little bit of research on our Scottish lineage. If you didn't know, Bridget and I are sisters. Our Scottish ancestors' last name was Black. They were either part of the MacLean or the MacGregor clan, both of whom were Jacobites. I couldn't find a specific ancestor that was known to be a Jacobite. However, we did have family living near Culloden in the 1760s, and I would imagine that there was some living there in the 1740s as well. Crazy to think about.
That's actually really cool.
Yeah, we don't know of there's nothing in our family tree that says oh, this person was a Jacobite or this person was loyal to the British, but there was definitely, like, some family congregated.
Yeah, just even, like, proximity to the history is really cool.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that, like, all these years later. Weird. So now that Prince Charles has recruited the help of the clans, the official rebellion begins in September with the Battle of Preston Pans.
The Battle of Pots and Pans.
Very close. Preston Pans. The three of us have studied the American Revolution at a decent length. We understand, like, all of the key details and can talk about it for a while. And I think one of the best parts of that history is these American underdogs going up against the massive British army, and this is very similar. I see quite a few similarities to the colonists and the Scots here. Both of these groups of people, are these sort of backcountry folks who are taking up arms against the Redcoats, and no one thinks that they have a chance. The Jacobites don't have a chance, and we're going to get there later. But it's interesting to look at how these things are, like, similar across time and kind of these, like, underdog stories.
Spoiler alert, Natalie.
Yeah, sorry. The Jacobites do not restore the Stuart line, but we'll get there in a minute. So at Preston Pans, or Pots and Pans, as Macy calls it, the British and the Jacobites are separated by a marshy area, which is not passable. Charles, Prince Charlie, wants to pass through the marsh, but his generals advised him to hold. A local farmer's son actually approached the Jacobites and told them of a secret passage to the British camp, and early that morning the Jacobites attacked. This is one of the things that I adore about history, these side characters to major events that change the direction of history itself. Who knows how differently things would have gone if not for that farmer's kid. Preston Pans is a major Jacobite success. Under the direction of General Murray, the Jacobites and Prince Charlie defeat a sizable group of redcoats, which, as you can imagine, is a major morale boost for the cause. To the British, this solidifies that there's certainly an issue here and that they should be worried. From here, the Jacobites decide to press towards England. The British troops funnel into Derby, which is just outside of London, basically surrounding the Jacobites. At this point, General Murray believes that it's kind of useless to continue. To Prince Charlie's dismay, the decision is made for the Jacobite troops to retreat to Scotland. What's so interesting here is that the French had actually sent a few small naval fleets across the English Channel that were essentially waiting for an invasion to occur so that they could help out. So if the Jacobites had pressed onward, they would have met them there. Again, these little things that could have changed the course of history are really scattered throughout the story. So with the Jacobites back in Scotland, they continue to prove themselves a worthy fighting force, going on to win the Battle of Falkirk in 1746. But as winter was raging on, the Jacobite army decided to hunker down and wait for spring. During this time, small skirmishes occurred, but no major battles happened. In the spring, the Redcoats and the Jacobites were inching closer to each other, and reality was setting in for the Jacobites. Time was running out. Finally, in April of 1746, at Culloden Field, the Jacobites and the Redcoats met for what would become an intense and bloody battle. A total of 1,600 men were killed, 15 of whom were Jacobites. So that's a pretty staggering amount of loss for the Jacobite cause. Their hunger and weakness was certainly a contributing factor to their defeat. They just came out of that really tough winter with not a lot to eat, and of course, it's not exactly great for battle. Culloden serves as the end of the Jacobites and their cause. Following Culloden, the British, and I should probably note here, the Battle of Culloden is just the name of the field where it took place, and it's like essentially like an empty field. And so if you think about that from like a military perspective, it's just like a flat surface. Mm-hmm. Like there's no like leverage or like advantage. Yeah.
Or like cover really like pretty exposed.
Yeah, I mean it was like very much just like total wipeout, like man on man. Mm-hmm. So following the Battle of Culloden, the British made it a special mission to dispel any more Jacobite sentiment in the Highlands and subsequently crushed the clan culture altogether. Clan chiefs were deposed, Jacobite estates were seized, and kilt and tartans were banned. Tartans are the fabric patterns that represent clan membership, so each clan would have its own like plaid almost pattern detailing like with different colors, which would detail which clan you belong to. Mm-hmm. These were often worn as kilts. So not only were these cultural sentiments destroyed, but the Gaelic language, which is native to Scotland, was destroyed as well.
So was clan culture in Scotland a threat to British dominance there? And like if it was, why and how was it?
So, yes and no. The British assured dominance with their win at Culloden, but their main goal was to crush any Jacobite thinkers still left in the Highlands as retribution. Because of this, they believed that dismantling every bit of clan culture would be the best way to achieve this. It's sort of this age-old question of did they really need to do this, which is hard to discern. The British introduced a law known as the Act of Prescription to legally carry out the crushing of Highlander culture. The act was introduced after Culloden to basically reinstate an earlier act that focused on suppressing Jacobites. The act introduced high penalties, including indentured servitude in British colonies on plantations for any Jacobite sympathies, or other things like just wearing a kilt. You could be jailed or sent into indentured servitude for wearing a kilt or a tartan. One of the key takeaways here is that because of the British dismantling Scottish culture, many Scots immigrated to places like America. Many settled in the Blue Ridge as well as other areas of Appalachia. I find this to be really cool since Scotland and the Appalachian Mountains used to be part of the same mountain range when Pangea existed. If you look at images of Scotland, it may look really similar to areas in Appalachia. All three of us are Appalachian, and our families have been in Appalachia for a pretty long time. I think I've always heard that there are many Scottish enclaves in the area, but knowing about this history makes it so much more interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question on how do you think this might have influenced Scottish independence ideas more recently, more modern? I know in our comparative government class last year we talked about the referendum in 2014 and how it almost passed but didn't, to make Scotland its own country. So how do you see that carrying the sediments of the Jacobites into more modern day times?
Yeah, so first, let's thank Macy for giving me a break from speaking. If you can't tell, I'm suffering from quite the hoarse throat. Sorry in advance for that. They think that I sound totally fine, but I don't. So to answer your question, the Jacobites are definitely not a political faction that exists anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You might find a handful of people that I guess maybe would believe in that, but it's kind of outdated because the monarchy is very much
ceremonial
a backseat kind of.
Yeah.
It's a ceremonial now.
Sorry. However, I just read up on this that 2 days ago the Scottish National Party suggested that there could be a new independence referendum introduced in the near future. The last one was rejected at
Mm-hmm.
a decent margin.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that this probably is still, and I would venture to say is definitely still a wound on Scottish culture and Scottish history. It's not anything by any means. It's introducing a civil war in Scotland with
Mm-hmm.
Britain right now. But I would say that, I would venture to guess that it certainly has makes some people independently feel a certain way about the British,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
We had also thrown out the idea earlier that perhaps, speculation of course, part of the reason that the referendum in 2014 didn't pass is because things that they had, their own parliament, you had suggested that,
Yeah.
Macy.
That the British kind of made a lot of concessions that have in a way quieted independence movements. Definitely not silenced them. I don't know the exact percentages on the referendum, but I believe it was somewhat close.
Yeah, I think it was I'm quoting this off the top of my head. I think it was something 55% decided to stay,
Yeah.
and then 43.
So yeah, very close.
44?
Yeah.
But yeah, we were talking about how Scotland having its own parliament and these concessions have kind of helped to maybe mend the relationships that we are not seeing mended during the rebellion
Not in the 18th
1745.
century. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Another thing that I wanted to ask for you to maybe elaborate on is you'd mentioned the ships, the French ships that were waiting kind of to just aid the Jacobites in further attacks
Mhm.
on
Yeah.
English forces, but were not met, and how the French also helped in the American Revolution, and sort of they played a major role, and would we have succeeded without them, and kind of just the French role in fighting England through all these different modes.
Yeah, do you want to detail really quick the role that the French did play in the American Revolution?
I can try.
Okay.
If you guys want to help, we all took the American
Yeah.
Revolution course. Basically, in most of these conflicts with Great Britain, especially, in these periods of history, world history, anyone who goes against Great Britain is the underdog. Great Britain is like one of the great powers of the world, and it's just not. It would be very difficult to succeed, and so definitely America was the underdog, and a lot of what helped us was the French naval fleet. I know Frenchmen fought with us, like Lafayette, and they provided a lot of money as well, and I know we had talked earlier, and we all think that perhaps America would not have fared so well without the French. So, yeah, very influential.
Yeah, so back to like the Jacobite cause. The French like naval fleet wasn't by any means like a large military like support. They were just kind of there. They'd heard like rumors of this happening. Not rumors, but like I mean it was happening obviously. So I mean they were there for like standby essentially. I think the question is though, if these ships had gotten involved, if the Jacobites had invaded, you know, England or London, would France have sent more support?
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned earlier, like France is Catholic at this time, and while this is not like it's definitely a major part of the Jacobite rebellion. The difference between like the Catholics and Protestants, not all Jacobites were Catholic, but it was certainly an idea that was important to them, that the lineage was somewhat Catholic-ish. And so France being Catholic, I don't know if you can detail any more on this. Like,
France during the Reformation generally stayed pretty Catholic. Obviously, there were like Huguenots, and there was Protestant Reformation had a hold in France, but largely like the monarchy and France itself remained Catholic, and any sort of like England being Protestant, which they did become Protestant, would be a threat to France regardless. So kind of that would be one of the major reasons that France maybe wants to poke at England a little bit. So
yeah, kind of building off of that, I know me and Bridget have done a lot of research on like Mary Queen of Scots and her attempt to get the English throne, and we see France kind of playing a part in that, and that I just felt like was an interesting little. This is before this, but
they definitely back Mary Queen of Scots because she's Catholic. The other option is Elizabeth I, who is Protestant. So the question in England is who gets it, and the crux of the issue is Catholicism or Protestantism, and France is definitely leaning towards Mary for that reason.
You can always see France meddling, where maybe they shouldn't meddle, but they're gonna meddle.
Yeah, they're certainly
it's helpful at times, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
at times,
happy they helped in our revolution.
Yeah, I think that this idea that we like wouldn't have. I don't know. I go back and forth on this. Like the idea that we wouldn't have won the revolution if it weren't for France.
I think it's one of those hard what if questions.
I think it's something you just can't ever know
both,
for sure.
But yeah, you'll never know.
Yeah.
We can stick with our we would have won anyways.
Yeah. Let's go with that.
Actually,
pure
we didn't need the
confidence. Pure confidence.
We thank France for all
we're
they
kidding.
did
Thank you,
to help.
Thank you, France.
Yeah, so it's I find that connection very intriguing too, that in both of these kind of rebellions, if you could call the American Revolution a rebellion, I think you can. But the French are there consistently.
What is it, like the enemy of my enemy is
my
friend?
Friend? Yeah, that is
if somebody's going
you
against
Britain,
fight
them? Yeah, like
France is going to be there.
Yeah.
I also wonder, you talked about earlier how after Culloden, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes, you're correct.
How the English tried to suppress Scottish, like, culture and, like, I don't know if society is a word, but, like, yeah. And this kind of reminds me of what we see the British do in Ireland. And, like, especially the language thing I thought was really interesting. And then during the Troubles, trying to, like, suppress that rebellion. And I just wonder if, I mean, obviously that's a very different time, but there's obviously, like, Irish uprisings before the Troubles in the 90s. So, like, I wonder if, you know, the attitudes that we see during the Jacobite rebellion are kind of also used later by the British government.
Yeah, I often forget because, like, I don't really study European history. just how massive, like, the British Empire was, and, like, the power that they still sort of hold. Like, they're not an empire anymore, obviously. But, I mean, like, the Troubles were somewhat recently.
Yeah.
In you know, recent memory, at least, more so than the Jacobite Rebellion, obviously. Yeah, I think this idea of, like, the British really wanting people within their direct vicinity to sort of assimilate is very interesting. I mean, there's always this question of, like, why? And I don't really know if we'll ever know that. Like, there's no one person to ask, you know, why is that so important that these groups of people that are essentially, like, your neighbors, if not, like, within the same, you know, realm or kingdom or whatever we call the UK, democracy, parliament, something.
Yeah, you're there.
Some type of republic, I don't know. Like, why, what is the point behind wanting them to assimilate? I don't know, maybe that's an idea that, I mean, we see that perpetuated in American history with, like, the forced assimilation of Native Americans and indigenous people. But we often also hear that kind of contradicted almost with the idea of, like, the melting pot and, like, we're...
Yeah, it's kind of like who, at least I take it as who do you see as a threat? So maybe, like, the Scots and the Irish coming to America, we see more in common, well, the settlers saw more in common with them than maybe they do the indigenous people who they saw as more of a threat. And then maybe that's the case here, where the English are seeing the Scots and the Irish as more of a threat to their superiority. Yeah. So they want them to assimilate into them. At least that's how I see this.
All speculation, you know, on...
We don't know everything, believe it or not.
No, certainly not. And there's no, like, good person to ask, like...
These are very, like, convoluted, like... Large historical questions.
Deep questions, yeah. Any other questions for me about this history?
I can't say I knew a lot about the Jacobite Uprising, but this makes me want to go watch Braveheart, you know? Learn a little bit more.
I haven't heard it. Please detail, like, what is Braveheart about?
I don't know a ton about Braveheart. I've never seen Braveheart. Fun fact, my parents' first date, I believe, was to go see Braveheart.
Whoa. Wow. I'm going to have to, Bridget, are you on this?
I believe it's about, it might not be about this Jacobite Uprising, but I believe it is about...
I see Mel Gibson, first of all.
I do know.
It's an American epic historical war drama. Let's see.
I believe it's about Scottish independence.
It is, but I can't tell. Hold on.
Maybe it's fictional. Maybe it's, like, based off of just the idea.
Exactly what it's based off of. I don't know.
In 1280.
Okay, so certainly a while ago.
Before. Maybe Braveheart influenced the Jacobites.
Maybe. I'm sure Mel Gibson was.
Even though it came out in the 1990s.
Hey, so this just shows, though, that Scottish independence had been a long-standing idea.
Like I
said,
that,
you know, the oppressed are constantly rising up against their oppressors.
Correct.
I'm making historical connections here to not look dumb that this movie was made before I thought it was.
It's all good.
No, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, I do have to agree with you, though. I really did not know much of anything about this prior. We all know American history is more of all of our forte, right? You're more European.
Yeah, but later.
Way later, yeah, of course.
Cold War.
But, yeah, this is very interesting, and I really didn't know much of this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad I could teach you guys something. I think this is an interesting part of history, especially coming from... All three of us come from Scottish heritage.
We do, yes.
So,
even if I'm not related to them.
Yes, yeah.
Somewhere, maybe.
Yeah, maybe...
I can hope.
Maybe they fought on the Culloden battlefield
maybe
together.
our ancestors were buds, just like us. I choose to believe it. You can make your own history sometimes.
For sure. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in again to the Past Us podcast. We're so happy to have you here, and thank you for the support.
Thanks.